just to share a little bit of the background here. So I've been at New York Life going past 7 years. I'm a partner here at New York Life's Westchester General Office, which is about 20-25 miles north of the city in White Plains. My background, I studied finance. I'm a 2004 graduate, like you are, alumni here. And I've worked in finance and corporate HR. Before getting to New York Life, I was a director of HR for a media firm in the city and learned right through all the different channels there and also from a lot of good mentors. And somehow, some way made myself up this way. So I'm glad to share some of the things that I've picked up along the way. But again, as I mentioned, I love to learn from you guys as well. So if we can make this interactional and kind of in that conversation, this will be a great hour spent. Hopefully you take away one or two things, and that's the ultimate objective. And hopefully we can get to a place where we all feel good about, spending this hour together. Okay, so without further ado, I'm just going to share my screen. I haven't prepared a ton here, but I just wanted to kind of guide the conversation as we go forward. Visually, everything okay? Can you guys see that? Good. All right, very good. We got the thumbs up. If we were to unmute ourselves, maybe this is what it would look like, right? Everybody talking at the same spot. But again, as Marian introduced, as you are fully aware, right, in any type of working environment, we're going to run into conflict. And that's part of human nature. And I'm going to encourage you to kind of think of it this way. Having conflict is not necessarily a bad thing. It's inevitable. We know that. At the same token, it's not a bad thing. And what I mean by that, and I'll share a little bit of examples from that as well. But as we move forward here, I'm going to ask for your kind of input here. When you think about conflict, what comes to mind? So if you want to unmute yourself and you want to share some thoughts, what comes to mind when you think about conflict?
Competing deadlines.
Sandra said, I'm sorry, one more time, Sandra.
Competing deadlines.
Okay, deadlines. Okay, thank you.
Communication.
Okay, communication.
Difference of opinion.
Difference in opinions. Okay.
Not meeting
personalities.
Personalities. Okay.
Yeah.
Functional or dysfunctional.
Functional. Great. Okay.
So misalignment with expectations.
Definitely seen that. What else comes to mind? That's great things so far. We hit pretty much all of it, you think? And we'll dive a little deeper. And again, I'd love to learn from your experience as well to see how we can impact and also share some of the best practices as we go forward here. So I have, competing deadlines, communication issues. We also have difference in opinions, personality issues, which can be kind of lead to dysfunctional teams and, misaligned expectations. That's what I have so far. I'm not sure.
Sorry, Daniel. There's also some points in chat that people have said. It's like problems with people, arguments, competing interests, unhappy and upset. Those are different interests. Those are some things that are in the chat as well.
Awesome. So I'm not looking at the chat box. I'm sure I'll learn how to do this as we go forward here as well. There we go. Now I can see that as well. So thank you. Appreciate that. What does this tell us? We've all experienced some sort of this, right? Conflict in our work experience, right? If maybe one and maybe two, or maybe all, unfortunately. And again, what does this all create, right? It's a situation that we may be uncomfortable. We want to learn how to move forward, how do we improve, and also how do we lessen, right, that stress that we feel when these situations arise. I do want to quote from here as I pull this up as well, as I look to manage this. A lady by the name of Hannah Einem. You may have heard of her. I was introduced to her course through LinkedIn as well. She's a leadership coach for Fortune 500 companies. And she stated this in her value prop. She said, hopefully you can read this along with me. When you bring people together, right, conflict is a natural part of the dynamic. How leaders choose to manage these inevitable disagreements can make the difference between a dysfunctional team and a successful one. So acknowledging kind of where we're going with this is things are going to happen, right? Situations are going to arise, as you all clearly stated. But how we deal with that is going to determine, are we going to have a dysfunctional team or are we going to have a successful one? And I don't know anyone here that's wants a dysfunctional team to add to their stress load. I definitely do not, right? So how do we work around some of these situations and manage? So, we've all dealt with different situations as we go forward here, but let me share with you. I'm sure you've seen some type of form of this iceberg, right? It may, show up on a lot of different ways, but what we're talking about here is the conflict iceberg that she illustrates. And one of the things that's identified here is, as you know, tip of the iceberg, there's certain things that show up, and then there's a lot more that's behind it, right? Does that make sense? In terms of dealing with a situation where you have conflict, right? In a team setting, on a one-on-one setting, it might be a personality clash. There may be different things that are going on that, again, the other person that's, that you're working with may not recognize about you, and you may not, right, as well on the other side too. So there's other things that we have to be mindful of, right? And kind of thinking through this situation. If you think about this, how do we reduce some of this tension, if there is? Again, we never want to walk into an office or working part of a team and we get stressed just by thinking about, right, doing a project or working on something together. But the reality is, right, we all need to make an income, right? We all need to, right, continue to work to be productive. And yet there may be folks in the room or folks that you work with jointly that ultimately it's not a good fit. What can we do? That's the question here. Okay. So with this in mind, I would ask you, so what are some of the ways that we can kind of alleviate some of the tension that might be created? So I've joined, again, I've worked in corporate HR for about 12 years. Prior to, I worked in different dynamic teams, big, huge teams, smaller teams, right? And one of the things that I recognized was every team is different, right? And that relationship that you have with a colleague versus someone who you report into, as well as folks that report into you, is going to be a different scenario. Therefore, again, we're going to learn how to manage that, but also thinking about how can we make this, right, all work? How can we all benefit from this type of relationship? As we know, conflict is going to arise when what's said as well as what's done may not be in line with what you expect, as well as what you see how you see that happening, right? How that is going to play out. And therefore, there's going to be moments where you think, what did that person say? Why are they saying it this way? And you know what? Why can't they understand exactly what I'm trying to get across there? So, how can we alleviate that? I guess that's the first question I would put out there. Have you, when you started a new team, when you joined a new department, when you started a new role, right, really taking time to get to know your teammates or your workmates or your colleagues, right? What do I mean by that, right? It can take a simple, right, getting a coffee together, getting a bite together, but also taking time, right, initially from the onset to get to know them. I remember reading a book as well as implementing this when I took the role of an HR director, where the first 90 days is really going to be a good indicator of how successful you're going to be. And in that, you want to make sure that you take time to get to know, right, the department heads, right, as well as the folks that work in those different departments. And I took that to heart because that allowed me to, one, take my folks out to lunch, which is awesome, but also get to know them on a personal level. So why do I say this? It's a pretty simple, right, idea. But if you take the time in the beginning to get to know that person that you're going to be working with and build at least a little bit of that rapport, that's going to help, right, in many, many ways. You'll find out that, I have two kids, right? I have an 8-year-old and a 4-year-old, right, that I worked. I'm a Mets fan. I'm not ashamed to say that right out loud. You'll find out that, I love to do certain things. I used to snowboard, but I can't do that anymore, right? Or I choose not to at this point. But ultimately, you get to know each other a little better. Why is that so important on the onset? So I'll bring it out to you guys again, right? So one thing I just mentioned was to get to know your teammates or your workmates or your colleagues, right? Even your superiors from the beginning, right? And set that up so then you get to build that relationship. So they put a face to a name. It may not always be possible to do so, But if you are working in that space where we can set aside time to get to know each other a little better, would that be helpful? It's not rocket science what I'm proposing out there, but have you had an experience when you did that early on that maybe helped you in your career? Maybe if you think back, maybe I didn't get to know my colleagues or my superior or whoever it is on a more personal note, and therefore that led to even more clashes, right, later on. I feel like I'm speaking to the group here, but I don't really see too many faces, but does that make sense? Any comments or thoughts on that, what I just stated?
Feel free to also put it in the chat if that's easier for some people.
Okay, that's fine. I'll take a look at the chat as well. Okay, first impressions.
Rebecca says, how do you do it in a virtual world?
Awesome. That's one of the challenges that we face, right? So even today, if we wanted to get to know each other a little better, right, what can we do, right? Again, it takes a little initiative where, let's say after this presentation or this conversation that we have today, you and I set up where we connect on LinkedIn and we message each other and say, I'd love to get to know you a little better. Maybe we can't do that, but there is something called a virtual coffee. I haven't done too many of those, even though I do love coffee and I love to go and grab a cup of coffee with you. What I do is I actually, maybe I'm old school in this way, but I feel that even a phone call helps to alleviate a lot of the stress. So we can text, we can email, we can even do this, right? Where we're gonna be able to get to know each other a little better. But even just a phone call to hear your voice over a phone, if we're not able to meet physically, that's helped us a lot. And absolutely, Nancy, virtual happy hour, even for our teammates that are bringing it on. So I manage a team of 15 financial advisors at New York Life. Everybody's different, right? Folks that are experienced, that are coming from another firm, folks that I bring on and I train them as well. And we have virtual hours typically on Fridays between 4 and 5, where literally it's bring your own beer, right? So we do that. We get to know each other a little better. We play different games just to kind of get to know each other that way as well. But just to alleviate some of the, okay, this is who you are on the other side. But that's something that we regularly build into our onboarding as well when we have new folks coming in. So we're trying to make it happen. Again, I'd rather much be able to go out and have a beer and drink and whatnot afterwards. But I say that because even getting a cup of coffee or even having the conversation where you get to know the other person on the other side, a little bit more on a personal level truly will help you, right? Alleviate some of this tension. What can you ask, right? Some of the things you can talk about, I'm sure, right? Where did you grow up, right? How many, what number are you in your family in terms of how many siblings do you have? How many kids did you grow up with, right? That's a good way to get things going. Getting to know about their past a little bit more as well, I think is super helpful as well. And again, even finding out what are some of the challenges that they went through. Again, we're not trying to stalk anybody. We're not trying to find out everything and everything about them in the first meeting. But just taking that initiative initially early on is going to be helpful in alleviating that kind of unsaid tension that may be in the room as well. Okay, so that's one point I wanted to bring up. I appreciate the chats as well. So what can we think about when we actually are in a situation? We've tried that. Let's say we met with them, we had conversations, we're doing different things, and yet there's going to be tension, as we talked about. There's going to be conflict, right? There's going to be situations where you're wanting to get something from that other person, but they're not giving it to you in a timely manner. They may be doing things that are completely different from what you know, right, to be the better process in which to do the business. But how do we resolve that? There's going to be a lot of things, but I want you to keep this kind of iceberg in mind, that how they react to you and what they say in that situation is not all that's there. There's a lot more behind it, right? In terms of what really is behind that. And then for us to actually take time to be able to have that type of conversation as we go forward and try to understand where that other person is coming from. And that's ultimately, how we can better, resolve an issue. Thomas Kelman model, you may be familiar with. I'm sure there's other folks that are here that are HR executives and folks that work in different capacities as managers, as leaders in your firms. But he introduced this kind of XY chart here, where on the left-hand side, right, and the way that we communicate and the way that we follow through and how we execute what we want to deliver is going to be in two different ways here. So one is being assertive, obviously from low to high. We can look at that, as well as being cooperative. And if you look at this, you would think, is there a good point in place where I can be more assertive and more cooperative? Is there a middle point? Is there kind of the beta or the alpha, whatever you want to call it, where it makes the most sense? And we'll go into that in a little bit more detail here. Okay. Being assertive as well as cooperative really means these points that you see on the screen here. Some of the things that's highlighted here, it's pretty straightforward. It's simple. We want to keep this as simple as possible because, again, we want to implement as best we can. But it's really that, right? To see not only the other person's point of view, but again, keep your side as well as that other person's side in context there, and then address the issue as it comes up. Be present in the moment. That's it's easily said. Be curious as to why that person is reacting in a certain way. We're going to have situations where tensions are high, deadlines need to be met, and everybody's stressed. And when stress hits, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Right? And we've all heard this before, where it's either fight, right, or flight. We've all heard that before. How do you deal with stress? And is stress necessarily a bad thing? Listen, we can argue both ways, but we understand that stress sometimes allows us to hit deadlines a little earlier, but sometimes we react in a certain way under stress that's necessarily not who we are, right? That being said, what can we do? And one of the clear things that's highlighted here is to stay calm, despite being uncomfortable in that situation. How can we do that? I'm sure you've experienced this before as well. Can you take 10 seconds, 5 seconds to take a breath before you react? We get those emails sometimes when it's like, bam, what are you saying? What do you want from me? Why are you saying it in this way? And you think back, you're like, this person I remember, looked at me the wrong way last week, or just didn't, acknowledge my comment in that team meeting before. And now we're working in this virtual world, so am I. I read this the other day where they said one of the most annoying things that people do on Zoom is to eat in front of the camera, right? I'm guilty of such, so I have my drink here, but I haven't been really kind of dabbing at it yet. But that being said, again, what's the right way to say that? Stop eating in front of the camera. It's so annoying, right? You can say that, but can you say it in a better way where they don't take offense to it, right? Or they look at that and they say, you know what, can I say it in a manner where maybe they understand that it's not the most appropriate thing to do? Again, if it's a lunch meeting, if you're doing a happy hour, if you're having beer, it's a different story, right? But my point in saying that is, before we react, take a moment and think about what that person may be going through, right? Again, if they have to eat on screen, maybe they didn't have a chance to, take a bite all day, right? And they just have to eat, right? Maybe that's what it is. They may be dealing with other situations that maybe they can't, say out loud, that they're under a lot of pressure, right? That they have to do these things, right, in a certain manner. So I would encourage you, think about the situation you may be dealing with as well as you have experience. And could you have, if you took 5 seconds, 10 seconds before you reacted a different way? So the reaction that we're talking about here, again, we want to be assertive and cooperative. And going back to this model here, there's 5 different ways that we can react. So again, from the avoidance, if you look on the bottom left-hand corner there, we can avoid the situation, can we not? We can just basically say, I don't want to deal with it, and I leave the room, where I just don't have that conversation. If that other person on the other side is very emotional and they're really kind of, not in a good place, then maybe it's a good thing to leave the room per se, to avoid that conversation at that point. Everything on here, there's no good, perfect answer. But my point in sharing this with you tonight, and help me as well, is that we can react a different way depending on the situation. Can we be, more assertive? We can. Can we be more cooperative? We also can do that as well. But if you look at the 5 different reactions we can have here, there's no wrong answer, but for the situation, we have to kind of learn how to be flexible, right? So you can avoid a situation if you're assertive and you're on the high, you can, right, kind of come out as competing. And is that necessarily a bad thing? Not necessarily, but is that always the answer? And that's the right learning here. There's different ways to react to a situation, right, that we can kind of grow from as well, depending on the situation at hand. Again, compromising is highlighted right in the middle where you're also assertive. Because again, we all have deadlines, right? We all have to get things done. But if it's contingent upon someone else helping you to get there and they're not getting the work done, what can you do? What can you say? And a lot of that is, right, that's where tension rises, where, you know, again, a lot of what our results are, right, is kind of contingent upon someone else doing their part that helps to make sure that the deadline is met. So can you, right, look at this and say, can I approach it a little differently? I have situations, yeah, absolutely. I'll share a quick story here and hopefully I can learn from you guys as well. Just a simple story, but it just kind of stuck in my brain, right? When I first became a director of HR for a media firm, our average age of the employees there was relatively lower, on the lower side. Yes, no, indifferent, whatever that can mean. I just put it out there, right? But I'll share this story with you. So we had different departments, right? Obviously working on a social media marketing company. One associate did a great job. So she actually got promoted to go into another department, right? All celebratory, great stuff. It happens to be her birthday. So the old manager from the older department who loved her, right, and wanted to do that, wanted to celebrate her birthday. Okay, that's fine. But the new manager also wanted to do the same thing. So I know this is so trivial and you're like, why are we even talking about that? But again, it came to HR, right? It came to that situation where we're all trying to, at the end of the day, trying to figure out, why are they so upset with each other? What's going on here? They looked at it like, you know, why are you overstepping my boundaries? She's on my team now. I want to celebrate the birthday. I want to do this. And it all came down to what at the end of the day? We want to do something good for the employee. And yet that caused so much friction, right, within the teams that, again, it just blew up for absolutely no reason. Everybody had their cake, right? Everybody was happy at the end of the day, but it came to that situation. So again, working in HR, I can't say everything that we worked on in the past as well, but you would just say, wow, these are adults, right? But this is the kind of conversations we have, right? It's kind of like we're on playing with young kids, right? I have 2 young kids, so I can kind of deal with that too, right? I'm sure you have experiences like that too, where if you look at the bigger picture, right, of what you want to accomplish, you know, can I be a little bit more cooperative, right, in that situation? And again, I'm sure we can find ways to win together. And conflict, I'm going to share this again, right, is not a bad thing. Conflict also, right, in a good way, brings out more creativity. Think about that. If you had a conflict with somebody that you just don't get along with that person on the team, right? Again, I appreciate the comments as well. Maybe power and control over the birthday. I get that, right? That's part of the inner dynamic that we're trying to, right, hold on to as well. And everybody's different the way they address it. But hopefully, again, from this session, if we take away one thing, we take a breath, think about the bigger picture, right? Is it worthwhile to go through all that, right, extra added stress, right? For what? To do a good thing at the end of the day. So again, that's a simple example, but it could have been avoided if we just had a conversation about it and did it together, right? And that's how we kind of resolved it, right, at the end of the day. Going back to my thought about conflict being necessary and how it can help you be more creative. If you had a situation where, and again, I'm guilty as such too, right? I work with other colleagues on my team that, amazing, right? They're superstars on their team that do amazing things, right? They're just smarter than me, right? And have a lot of ways to bring great ideas to the table. But maybe it just rubbed me the wrong way, right? I just can't get along with them. If you zone them out, especially on Zoom, the platform that we're using, can you mute them? Yeah, absolutely. You can just kind of turn the volume off when they're talking and you can do that, right? But does that solve anything, right? Or can you look at that situation and say, can I see why there's tension here, but also can I improve upon this as well? And I think that's something that, again, if you decide not to engage because you feel that there's no connection there, there's nothing that to benefit, that's your choice, absolutely. But you're not helping the bigger cause, right, at the end of the day, because you're pulling back because of a personality, right, conflict or something to that nature that you just don't get along. You're not adding to the benefit, right, of not only your team, but also for the entire company and also for your livelihood as well, right? Remember what Hannah Iman stated earlier, right? We want to decide, right, based on our leadership, do we want to have a dysfunctional team or do we want to have a successful team? We have the choice. Individually, right, that the decisions that we make day in and day out will reflect on our team as well as the overall organization as we go forward. Again, there's 5 here. Again, there's different ways to deal with situations. That's why I wanted to highlight this and just kind of reassure. We're in a situation where we're going to deal with conflict. We're going to have, things that really, are going to irk us. But if you think about it, what's behind it? Can I resolve this without, right, being that confrontational and be able to understand them a little bit? And can I say it in a manner that if you said the same thing 10 times, can you say it differently? Absolutely. If you said it a certain way, can it help you as well? I'll just bring up one thing. I say, I worked at Samsung for about 3 years. It's a big conglomerate, right? And one of the things that, I got into HR and then I was working a little bit more in a corporate setting, and it was a fun environment. I had a great mentor. And one of the first things I remember, again, I share this, right, guys, I share this with you guys because hopefully you can take a laugh at this as well, but it's still stuck in my brain, right? I remember sending out an email. Again, we need to get things done, right? Get things going, things of that nature. And then I got feedback. I got called into a conference room, right, from my mentor, right, who's my direct boss. And he said, hey, Dan, the way that you actually sent the email, do you think maybe you can look at that, right? I'm like, what do you mean? Again, I'm kind of, what are you talking about? I'm trying to do a good job here. And he goes, sometimes when you ask for something, you may come across as demanding it more than asking for it. And I kind of said, okay, that's good feedback. Can you give me an example? And then he just kind of said, right, when you're asking for some things, right, you can ask it in a question or you can just ask it in a statement. Okay, that's fair. But also he said, if you can, in your email, include this line, it might be helpful. He said, maybe insert something like, would you be able to, in your email? So would you be able to complete this by X, Y, and D? Would you be able to help me, right, get this done because this is due by a certain day? So just by putting it in that context, right, would you be able to? That softens that kind of approach, but it also, right, we know what we need to get done. But for me, that stayed stuck in my brain, right, for a long time. It still does. Because if I write my email and I say, this is what I need, this is what's going on, everything's good to go, I'm thinking, okay, am I being demanding here? Or do I need this done and I need their help and I can work together with them? So would you be able to was a powerful line for me. So I don't know, maybe that's something you can incorporate in your emails as you go forward and see how the reaction comes back, right? We all know if we work in the city, if we live in the city, if we walk around, right? If someone asks you for directions, typically, right, we do give directions, right? We want to share that. We all want to be helpful too. So when you ask in that capacity, but also know that, right, there's a deadline that needs to be met, I think that's one way that we can kind of soften that relationship as well, where, again, the end goal is to be what? To have a successful team, right? To be able to work together towards a common goal, right? At the end of the day. So hopefully I hit a couple of these parts. Obviously I can't cover everything that we're, wanting to cover per se, but we'll leave it up to that as well. But just as a reminder, a successful team, an effective team, right? We all know this. Work together to achieve, right, your goals, right, to be productive. We all want to be productive. But the key word here is that, right, is to trust one another. How do you build that? You tell me. How have you built trust with your manager, your, right, folks that report into you, folks that you've worked with, maybe a counterpart in a different part of the country? How do you build that? As a human being, at the end of the day, we all want to what? We all want to be recognized. We also want to have, right, the ability where we can connect with another fellow human being and be a real person to each other. And that being said, there's different ways we can do that, right? It can start with a cup of coffee, it can start with a meal, but it might be even that extra, right, kind of note to them and say, great job, right? It's just something that's going to say, I'm watching, but I also appreciate what you do day in and day out. And even that, right, is, again, building right upon that trust. Have anybody experienced where somebody, right, stabbed you in the back? It happens, right, in corporate America. Let's not be shy about that. It happens. But I always believe, right, what goes around comes around. So, deal as you wish, right? Because the reality is, the work that you do and the way that you treat people, that's how they're going to remember, right, who you are as an individual. They don't care if your Excel is perfect and you know how to do pivot tables and all that fun stuff. That's great. But for us, it's really that, right, is to look at the situation that we know it's going to happen, right? But can we alleviate it, look at it ahead of time and say, can I get to know that person a little better, right, on a more personal level, understanding where they're coming from, take a breath when the situation gets a little, right, dicey. And can I pick up the phone sometimes rather than text and email? I remember hearing that a lot. And I say this too. So at New York Life, right, we do life insurance, investments, retirement planning. So we have a lot of clients that, especially during this pandemic, right, has gone through a lot, right? And obviously we all are living through this as well. And one of the key things that we found was not only just sending an email just to check in with them, but we literally reached out to all of our clients via phone. So that was our objective on my team, especially. And that voice on the other line was sometimes all they needed, just to hear that they're okay and doing whatnot. We're all human beings, right? At the end of the day. So again, I'm not saying every, conversation should be a phone call, but if you haven't picked up the phone to call somebody, try it. It doesn't hurt. To get to know them on the other side, to have this conversation. And again, I think that will lessen the stress a little bit when you can say certain things over the phone and necessarily you won't say on an email per se. And maybe it doesn't come out the way you want on an email versus when you say it on the phone. So again, text is fine. I get that. We all use different mediums here, but sometimes going old school is not a bad thing, right? Pick up the phone, give them a call. If the tension rises where you don't understand them, take a breath and see if you can talk it out a little bit better. And I'm sure that's going to help alleviate some of the stresses that we all deal with, right, on a day-to-day basis. Okay. That's pretty much what I have. I'm sure we can talk about a lot more. If you want to reach out to me, again, I'm a partner here in the New York Life's Westchester office. This is my email. Very simple, Daniel Oscar Henry at newyorklife.com. And you can connect with me on LinkedIn. I love to connect with you guys as well. I want to learn from you as we go forward here. One thing I want to keep in mind is, and again, in my team, our mantra is performance is expected, but leadership is the differentiator. So we're always looking for leaders, right? To do it the right way, to lead by example, and to be able to manage. Why is that the case, right? Because leaders, when you do this the right way and you manage the team right effectively, they're the ones that's going to be tapped on the shoulder, right, for better opportunities. That's true, right? I'm sure in any organization, because they're looking for folks that can deal with these stressful situations, that can work out a solution and also, right, benefit the company. And that ultimately, right, that's going to come from your actions, the work, and the way you handle situation as well. So again, I don't have all the answers. I don't pretend to be someone like a guru or any of this. I was asked to come and I gladly accepted because I want to give back to what my learnings here or there. And hopefully you guys took some takeaways from this as well. So I thank you again. I'll open it up. Again, you guys can ask questions and share thoughts. And I'd love to learn from you as well as we have this conversation here tonight.
Great. Thank you, Daniel. We do have one question so far. Please, everyone, if you have a question, just put it in the chat. It's easier because it's hard to know who's about to talk and then you end up talking over each other. So I think if you put your questions in the chat, that'll be easier and I'll try to manage it for now. But the one question we have with regards to your talk, I think a couple slides back, is how do you give that type of feedback, constructive feedback or feedback in general to a manager or a superior? How to manage up, basically.
That's always a tricky one, right? I guess if you really think about how do we do that, right? I think it's got to come naturally. Again, we have performance reviews, and when we grade, right, even folks that we report into, we have that opportunity to kind of hopefully it stays right confidential, but we know who we're talking about when we're actually putting this feedback in. But I think what helped me in the past is to have that open communication with my superiors. I think that ultimately allows me to have and continue to work with them on an ongoing basis. And it takes time, right, to build that up. And I'm not going to give them feedback on every little thing, but simply is this, right? He's sharing something on the screen, and my managing partner, and it's his email, but he doesn't want to be sharing his email, right? But I'm going to raise my voice and say, hey, you're sharing your email, right? So everybody can see your emails going forward, right? I know it's simple as that, but I'm in a position where I can say that because I have built that trust with him.
Oh, somehow you're muted.
Okay, sorry about that. Someone wanted to mute me, so I get that. I guess that's a good call there. But my point there was building that rapport with my managing partner as well, because I built that trust, is that much easier for him to take that from me because he knows it comes from a place where I have his back, right? So if he's doing something that's not productive, I remember having a superior who, from multiple, different things, great idea. Those folks, maybe you're one of those, maybe. You have great ideas. So you throw this, you throw that, but you figure it out how to do it. Okay. Did you want to do this? Did you want to do this? Or did you want to do this? Right. Kind of deal. But great ideas, but there's no direction. And so what does that do for us? Right. On the back end, you're like, how do we figure this out? So again, it took a little time and kind of mustering up and saying, can you just tell me exactly what you think is best for the situation where we can concentrate, on these two objectives here, rather than looking at 10 different ways to do things. I think, again, having that open dialogue, because we would go out to lunch a lot, we would have ability to do that. I think that helped a lot. But just also getting to know them on a personal level, how to deal with that person, right? And that's helpful. I think that's helpful. If you know their stress, you don't want to say it then. You pick a time and place to do so, right? And just maybe casually bring that up if that's the case. And again, I'm not going to bring up too many issues with superiors at this juncture yet. I'll just kind of leave it at that, and it'll work out for its best, right? You do your part. Hopefully that answered your question. I'm not sure if that did or not, but that's what I can say.
Great, thank you. There's another question. It's from Kitching. Says, how would you handle bullying at work?
It happens, right? It starts from a young age, I think, bullying, right? Any aspect of that. And how do you deal with that? I think if you feel that you're in that situation, and again, this is kind of HR talking a little bit, if you feel that you're in that situation, you have to speak up, right? And, there's a reason why HR exists. And if you don't have an HR department, for whatever reason, then you do have to let someone know right above you. You don't want to handle it yourself. If you feel like that's the situation, and that that's how you feel, then you have to be able to express that to someone in a more senior position, because it needs to be documented. So again, we have financial services, we have compliance officers, we also have folks that work in corporate, that it's addressed. If something like that happens, right? And we have something called on an annual basis, different trainings that happen as well. And we go through real life case scenarios of what situations happen, how to handle them, and what you should do. And one of the biggest things that we say is, communicate that. Again, it's going to happen where even a person on their other side may not know they're acting in that capacity. Maybe they do know, but maybe they're not aware of how, they're coming across in that situation. So I think situation's going to, be different for different folks. That being said, if you feel that and that's what you're kind of feeling, then you got to bring it up. You have to communicate that. You got to say it out loud, because you can't. Again, that's not conflict. That's just not right. That's not a professional environment that you want to continue in as you go forward. So you do want to bring that up, and again, think about it, do it in a professional way, give clear examples of when you felt that way, and then be able to communicate that to the right department that can help you there.
Thank you. There was a follow-up comment or question with regards to this question. What happens if it comes from upper or top management?
Great question. I would ask you as well, right? If that's a situation, have you had a situation where, that was the case and you had to deal with that? I mean, I'd love to learn from you, as I mentioned earlier. I'll leave it to the group for their thoughts. Have you had situations where it came from top? Yeah, I don't want to put it out there, but type A personalities, right? Super aggressive, right? Like I got it my way kind of deal, right? Tend to, right, kind of get promoted and do different things. And maybe they don't realize, right, what type of actions that they portray. And again, it happens. And we deal with it in society day in and day out. Again, I think the biggest thing right now is you don't want to be in a situation where that prevents you from, right, doing your work, right, where fear takes over and you're kind of in that situation where you're like, I can't realistically work in this environment, right? With that being said, is there ways that you can look to, alleviate some of that, right? Maybe it's your direct boss, right? That's just giving you just all kinds of craziness. And you're just like, I can't deal with it. And then you take a breath and you assess your situation. Was he or she in the right to express herself in that way and try to understand that situation? Was she more, demanding or in that way bullying where I just feel very uncomfortable about, right, this working situation? If you know that's the case, you have to speak up, right? So it's not just if it's a CEO, if it's a founder, if it's, right, the president, it might be challenging, right? And you have to kind of, right, again, take it for what it is and say, look, am I willing to put myself in this situation, right, continually for work? If you're not, and it's that serious, then you have to make a move. You do, right? You go on LinkedIn and you look for a new job. Now I'm just, again, like you got to do what you got to do, but you got to speak up, okay? Because that's why, right, these departments exist and they're here to protect, right, what's in the best interest. So again, we've had situations, right, it happens where the founders, they have no idea how they are and they may push it off as such. They have charisma, they have that, they have this and whatnot. But the reality is, push comes to shove, if that person feels that way, then that has to be documented and that has to be addressed. And that's the way that this, right, hopefully we can get that to resolve. I don't know if that answered your question, but if it happens, I would say just assess your situation and then be able to speak up when you can, right? And then address that in a timely manner.
Great. Another question is, what can we do when we do provide constructive feedback and they're in denial or blame someone or something else?
I'm going to say this too, right? So my wife is my best critic, right? So if I present or do something, she tells me left and right. I ask her, did I do a good job or whatnot? And she'll let me know, right? So if I ask for it, it's easy to take. When I don't ask for it, it's hard, right? It's hard to take, right? So even if it's constructive, even if things that that you're in, you want their best, you have the best interest at heart, I would say kind of set the tone ahead of time, right? If they're presenting on something, if they're part of a team that's, right, doing different things that you feel that, right, you can help a lot. If you're the manager in that role, let them know, right? Just be like, I'm going to see how you present. I'd love to, right, give you feedback ahead of time. If you give them that heads up, it's a little easier to take. The same token, constructive feedback comes back, a little bit kind of like, what did you say there? When that's all we say and we don't, right, do the sandwich effect. Everybody know what that is, right? You got to compliment, give them the feedback, also compliment on the back end. So say it in a way where you saw good things, give them the feedback, then also compliment, right, other things that you saw in that relationship. So when you give advice, think of the sandwich or the hamburger, whatever you want to kind of, right, go after there, and think about that. Compliment, give them feedback, constructive feedback, and then compliment them again. And then it'll go down a little easier when they actually do that. Okay.
We have a question from Kim, and I'm trying, you might have to do a follow-up to this, Kim, but basically, and this I think answers a similar question someone had later on is, you talked about building relationship. Obviously that's important and that takes time. And sometimes there are some pressing things that are more urgent and then the actual building the relationship. So what do you do then when something is more urgent? And so I don't know if Kim, you want to clarify what the urgent means.
I
So,
just mean that sometimes when there's a conflict, it's good to use reflective listening so that if someone says, this is my conflict, then you repeat back to them, is this what you said the conflict is? And you keep doing that until you get it right. Do you understand what that person's conflict is? But that takes a lot of time. And sometimes there's a task at hand that may be more urgent than getting to the meat of the nut of the real conflict. So I was just wondering, in terms of reflective listening, how has the speaker used that, and if Daniel has had success with that, in his corporate, his business dealings.
I appreciate you expanding on that thought there, because again, we are encouraged, right, to listen to understand, right, what that person is conveying, as well as sometimes they may say it, but it doesn't all come across, right? So it does take that time to build that and to understand that person and how they communicate, right? If it's a new team member or whatnot, and you got to get things done. I take a lot of notes as well. Like, I have a lot of one-on-ones with my teammates. It's just part of the way that we're structured, where if I have a 30-minute Zoom with that person, I leave about 5 minutes at the end after the conversations that we've had, where I actually take notes and just kind of write down some of the thoughts I'm thinking, right? So, and then mentally it helps me to kind of collect my thoughts and what our conversation was, but also it helps me address kind of like things that's further, but I don't just let it linger. I think if you kind of the snowball effect, if you have one thing and another thing and another thing, right, it's just going to blow up, right? So you have to address it, right, and kind of deal with it in that given situation, even though we have a lot of pressing items. Again, we're on the deadline, but not every day is a deadline, right? There's opportunity where you can kind of make that mental note. If you take write notes as well, if that's something that's irking you, or the way that that relationship is continuing to progress, then take time to address it. Don't be shy about it, right? Be an adult about it, be a professional about it, and say, I know you mentioned this in a team meeting, but I just didn't understand why you would say it in that capacity, right? Do you know that sometimes, in a situation where the way you do things or the way you react impacts all of us, right? But maybe you may not be fully aware of how that does, impact all of us. I just want to bring that to mind because, again, I want to see the best in you. I want to see you continue to improve. And I would address it in that manner. So there's a time and place for everything. We all know that. We can't always stop and say, a million things in our brain. I said this before, but anybody remember Saved by the Bell? That's just my growing up that way. And I know they had a refresh. Remember when Zach Morris goes time out, right? And what does he do? It stops everything and everybody's pretending like they can still hear, right? We all know that. But that being said, he does this little monologue and he goes through the situation. I would say, even though we live such busy lives, take that time just to kind of see what the situation and see if you can, put out that fire for that moment. And then if it's something that needs to be addressed, right, a little bit later, don't just let it linger, right? There's a whole adage of, if you get into conflict with somebody, don't let the night pass before, right? If you're in a situation where you're butting heads, right, the old words of wisdom is don't let the night pass before you resolve that issue. It may take some time to do so. And again, in the heat of things, when things are going on, things are running, you're going to do stuff that maybe is not yourself. But at the end of the day, if you're looking to grow with them and work with them, right, continually, then at that point, you want to make sure you don't let that linger and continue to address that. So put out the fires when you can, but also don't forget, because then you don't want that to impact, right, your relationship going down. You all know, right? You get that feeling in your gut when something's not right and you want to address it, right? That's our instincts telling us. So don't ignore that and be able to put that down and address it, where, again, you don't want to nitpick everything. We don't want to be in that situation either. But if you know that it's going to be detrimental to growing together, then that's something that should be addressed maybe in another time. Again, once we stop putting on masks and we're all inoculated and we're good to go and we can meet in person again, right? We can have more meals and do that. And I think that breaking bread with somebody always helps at the end of the day. So that's my 2 cents there.
Great, thank you. Here's another question. I think it's more of a follow-up too from the other one. So that'll be a flight approach. Okay, so flight approach is leaving, but everyone else who stays suffers. But what then? How can we solve the issue and make it a safe environment if you do stay?
I think we've been emotional before too, right? I think in any situation, I have, right, where again, there's a lot of pressure on you. You got to deal with situations, and sometimes it's out of our control, and then something comes up where that's not who you are, right? And then, you may be in a room like that too with someone else that's in that situation, and it just doesn't warrant you leaving the room. What can you do, right? You can let the air speak for itself. Just kind of let it linger a little bit. Let the situation die down just a little bit. I know it's a simple thought, but that's taking that breath, 5, 10 seconds, just to kind of like, okay. And then these folks that you're working with most likely would do what, right? Okay. Sometimes you pause for effect, right? We do that. We can do that in any situation. Let it sit.
Okay.
All right. So if you're not able to leave that room, I think that just taking that breath and just letting that person catch their breath as well, I think may be helpful.
Great.
That's just my opinion.
So Wayne has a question, which is great. Everyone has some fantastic questions. Are you one of the most popular speakers with a lot of questions? So that's always good.
I don't know about that.
From an HR perspective, is HR truly immune from senior management? Can HR really reprimand and discipline senior management, such as the CEO, founder, etc.?
That's an awesome question. I'm just going to say, right? So every company is a little different. I'm just going to share that, right? I say that, and I came into HR because I want to be in the people business, right? And that was the reason why I went from finance. I was able to take on an HR role and just kind of grow within that. Sometimes HR is looked at as from a company from top down as more of a cost than an investment. And I say that a lot, right? Because they look at the department as saying, hey, right, HR director, you make X amount of dollars, you do this, you do that, that's how much it is a cost. And then there's companies on the flip side of that, and they say, right, it's an investment, right, in terms of your people, right, you manage things, you make things happen, right, you make things all flow. And everybody's, again, it's when you get into a situation where they look at you as a cost, then you really don't have too much say. I'm just going to be flat out, right? Yes, you have the department there, you have it there, but they may not have as much pull. But if you work for an organization that, obviously, right, highlights the employer and investment in them, then HR really is your advocate. And I think if you find one of those companies, if you've worked for them for many years, that's something you want to stick with. Why? Because they have your back. And how do you know if they're invested in their HR? See, you can tell. The training, the professional development that they provide, as well as all the different things that they do, not just the birthday parties, right? But all the things that they do in addition to, right? To help you feel that you're someone that's valuable to the company, and you feel that, right, every day when you go into work as well. So to answer your question there, I think I've seen both sides, unfortunately. And I'm super proud that I'm in a position now where I'm part of that kind of organization where I can, right, look at it as an investment, and they do. And then that's, what's reflective of the organization you're part of. And that's important. Folks are commenting on the chat box about culture. That's truly, right, the culture that you're in day day out. So I think depending on the organization, it's unfortunately left and right. But we all live in a very, can sue anybody for anything. So again, HR is in a position to make sure you document things. So if that's how they're viewed, is more of a policing rather than more of the I'm here to help you, then that's what it is. And you got to kind of play to that field, right, in that given situation. And I think that's, again, every department is a little different. And I know for the better part of my career, folks that I worked in HR all have that want, right, to do well. Right, it's not about me; it's about you, right? That's typically the folks that work in HR. I know they do, but sometimes they're not empowered to do so. So organizations that do empower, I think, have tremendous culture and the ability to make sure that the company continues to be strong for them.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
One other question is, generally speaking, what is your strategy for dealing with competing ideas around the sort of quotation best approach to achieving a certain end?
I think that's it. Again, competing ideas to me, that competition, that creative energy, I think that's what makes things good. I think how we perceive it, because it's not my idea that wins the way, I think is on us, right? And I'm going to just say this, right? Nothing changes unless we take the initiative ourselves, right? To shift the story that's in our own heads. Like, we have to think, is that a better way? Is that another way? Can I compromise? Can I, right, do that? I think the way you view it, right, will deem how that turns out, right, for the better for the team. So I think competing ideas, I always love that, right? Think about that. And I say this to my team all the time, where we compete, we don't compare. Where we compete, we don't compare. And that's because we want to be in a situation where we get the best output. And it comes, right, by putting our heads together. Just because your idea didn't win out, right, doesn't mean you didn't win. You absolutely. You may have, right, pushed somebody in a certain direction that made them, right, have that output as well. So you absolutely contributed to that thought process too. So I would love, again, I learn from you guys as well. As in, I'd love to get to know you one-on-one as you go forward. You got a great group here. I don't have all the answers. You're asking me the questions, and I just give it to you the way I feel that would maybe hopefully help you guys in this situation. So,
All right. Here's a good question that's different. Do you have any top books you would recommend, TED Talks, etc.?
Yeah, I was a big TED follower as well. So, I think all of that stuff on there. One of the most recent books I haven't finished yet, I've been doing a lot of Audible, but is Think Again by Adam Grant. It looks at the situation a little differently. Like, we thought of certain ways, and I don't know, maybe you've already read that as well, or listened to it. And you're kind of thinking, like, I thought that was the way. And then you get to re-examine it. You think about it again. So it kind of puts everything, right, and kind of what you thought you knew. For me, Maximum Gladwell, he's a great author as well. I just read all of his stuff. TED Talks, there's a couple favorites I have, and we all know him. Simon Sinek, I think he's a great speaker, where he introduces, right, why we do what we do. I think he's, again, someone that on TED as well and other mediums that I like to follow. And then earlier today, I was listening in a little bit when I could to Gary Vaynerchuk. Right? I'm sure you've heard of him before too, right? So VaynerMedia. A little brass sometimes, but again, right, you get to pick up here or there, like different things about how things are done. So I like to learn from different folks as well. And I think that's, again, I'm sure you do that and you read. I'm pretty sure more than I do a lot, right? I try to feed my mind as much as I could in that, so I can be a little bit more well-rounded, right, in my approach to things. And I'm not just one way or the other. I have a ability to kind of understand, right, different aspects of thinking. So hopefully that helped. I know I just kind of rattled off a couple of different things there, but.
Thank you. And I think those are all the questions, actually. I don't see any more. Oh, wait, sorry, there is one more. What challenges, if any, did you experience transitioning into HR?
Not knowing things. I think that was it. And then going from a smaller organization into a larger organization, I think was eye-opening as well. I didn't know how impactful certain things that we did in terms of policies and things like that kind of played out. And I also, again, I did dual roles for a better part of my career, which was helpful. So I got to understand both sides. I'll just give you a quick example. I worked at Samsung. I worked for the Samsung Group, and we did the advertising agency side. So I worked on that department. And I was tasked because one of the finance managers had left, and we were in a position to find a new finance manager. But because they knew of my background, they asked me to take on another role within finance. And we were overseeing Samsung.com. That was a $20 million website, like project, right? Tremendous, right? Like budget for that simple website. There's some deal about, and again, I'm sure there's Apple fans here on the call, but I'm still, because I worked at Samsung, I still own a Samsung phone. I go on their site and it stinks. I just don't like it. It's not bad promo or anything like that. My point is, I worked on that back end at Samsung to finance that site refresh many years ago, and quickly realized, right, how this is all connected. But learning the other side of the business helped me be a better HR person. So when you asked me about transitioning, I was tapped to do a dual role for a period of time. And that, again, I welcome all experiences, so that I wanted to learn, and I was given a position to do so. And that, again, allowed me to transition a little bit more easily, but I didn't realize how impactful certain decisions we made, right, really kind of went through the entire organization. Because we, again, represented just on the benefits page, 10,000 employees at one point. And that, again, was a true undertaking and learning as well. So I was humbled, and I still am. And I don't pretend like I know everything. And I always wanted to continue to learn. So that's my attitude going in. And that helped me to transition a little bit more effectively, I would say.
Great. I think those are it. I know you did a lot of talking. So
I did, yeah.
you know,
I want to hear from you guys. That's what I
Yeah.
want to hear from as well. But I love the questions as well, Maria.
Yeah. I think there were some, I mean, I don't know if you see the chat, but they all love your presentation and all the things that you're given, all the advice. So they really appreciate everything. And I definitely learned a lot too. So I think, you know, we'll end here. I wanted to, you know, please thank Daniel for coming today. I think, like Daniel said, you know, we just talked for about an hour. You're not going to be a guru today, you know, about this topic. So don't go over there and have that conversation tomorrow. As you know, but I think we learned a lot. Process it, let it sort of marinate. We do, like I mentioned in Starr, we do have an option for you to make a career counseling appointment. And it's a great opportunity to maybe practice with a career counselor, have this conversation, but also, you know, me being, you know, being trained as a therapist before I transitioned to be a career counselor, I can tell you know that both conversation comes from two sides. So Daniel's obviously says, have that courageous conversation. You know, it's good to talk about it. Without having that conversation, nothing's going to happen. Sort of what he's saying. But at the same time, you also do have to reflect about your contribution to the situation. That's also just as important. So be mindful that yes, obviously there are going to be two sides to everything, but be mindful about what we're doing to contribute to the conflict in this case, because that's important. Because sometimes people forget, and when I work with alumni one-on-one, I hear these stories all the time. But sometimes they always seem on one perspective, like this is happening to me, this is going on. But I always have to stop and say, what is your contribution to that situation, whatever that may be. Sometimes it's not your control, sometimes it is. But I always find that is so important, because I do feel like sometimes people forget that it takes two to create that conflict in many ways at work, right? In that situation. And having worked in HR and having had to have this conversation with people too, I always want to make sure that people realize there's two sides to everything too. And in the end, you do your best. I'm sure, just like Daniel, I've been in situations where I like, this culture doesn't fit for me, this supervisory style doesn't work for me, whatever it may be. I thought I did a good job of interviewing and getting a sense of what I'm getting myself into. But sometimes an interview situation is very different than a working situation. And sometimes it just doesn't happen. And it could be a personality thing. It could be the wrong fit, whatever it may be. And that happened. And that's unfortunately does happen. And that's where you decide, is this a stress I want to take on? Is this a situation I want to be in? And so forth. And then you make that choice, like Daniel said, touch up your LinkedIn profile, whatever it may be, strengthen your networking skills, and then think about how to transition into something else. But the good thing is Starr and Baruch has all these resources to help you with that. If that's the time that you choose, like, you know what, it's time for me to make that transition. It's time for me to move on. Baruch, we have all these services for Baruch alums, so please utilize it. Greg talked about all these wonderful events. They have tons of events. Most of it is free, so take advantage of it. Take advantage of that resource. I appreciate Daniel again for coming. You know, he's devoted a lot of time, not only for this time today, but also for other things in the past. So I want to say thank you so much for your time and helping us, educate us, especially about this topic. Before we end, I think, Greg, you want to mention something?
Yeah, no, just thank you, Mari, and thank you to all of our alumni who came out this evening. Really enjoyed. We had over 60 alumni on here, so just wonderful to see. Thank you, Daniel. Really appreciate all of your insight. And to everyone on here, we look forward to seeing you at some future alumni events. Like I mentioned earlier, we have a lot coming down the pike. And thank you again to Marian at the Starr Career Development Center for helping to arrange this. We will follow up with an email with the recording of this. So you'll be able to view it again, as well as some more information about resources and upcoming events. So we look forward to seeing you again. And Daniel, do you have any final words?
No, again, I thank everybody for making time and listening for the better part of an hour here. Again, I'm not an expert in all these different fields, and I'm sure there's folks on this call that I'd love to learn from as well. So feel free to reach out and connect on LinkedIn, and hopefully we can get coffee one of these days as well. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
I'll stay behind if anyone has any individual questions for me, but thank you, Daniel. Have a good evening.
Take care, Marian.
We'll be in touch. Thanks, Greg. For anyone else, I'll stay behind if anyone has any questions for me directly. I'm happy to entertain them. Oh, better stop recording.